Happy to be joined by Peter King of NBC Sports. Peter, thank you so much for hopping on.
Good to be with you guys. How are you?
Good, good.
Good. Peter, I know you've had a chance to talk with Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio, of course, a name that many people in NFL circles have been familiar with for years now, but this is the first time he's been a head coach. I know you're a fan of how he's handled his press conferences just from reading you and listening to you, but how do you think his transition has been?
I think it was a much needed transition. I think that what John Elway really wanted is, and again, this is no reflection on Vance Joseph, quite literally, no reflection on him at all, but I think John Elway wanted a classic football coach. He wanted a guy who can walk in the room and everybody can look at and say he's been there, he's done that, he's done it for a long time, and he's going to coach us in probably a more traditional way. Now, none of that matters without good play from the quarterback. None of that matters without a better defense. None of that matters, quite honestly, without the entire offense being significantly more competent than it was last year. And that's not exactly Vic Fangio's bailiwick, the offense. But I think this team, this training camp, is much more in the image of John Elway than the last two were.
I know that Joe Flacco, you mentioned him there. They're going to need consistent play from him. Heading into his 12th year in the NFL, he's got something to prove. What do you think is a best case scenario for Flacco this season?
I think the best case scenario is that he uses all of the kind of, I don't want to say anger. I don't think it's fair to say that Joe Flacco is angry at people in Baltimore or what happened in Baltimore. But I do think he has a huge amount of motivation to prove them wrong. And to say essentially, you guys didn't get me wide receivers for the last 3 or 4 years. I did the best I could. Now, again, we could probably talk all day whether Flacco is on the downside of his career or whether he was a victim of circumstances in Baltimore. So, but I do think that one of the things, this is something that John Elway pointed out to me, and a couple of players said after practice yesterday that, and again, it can be so misleading to watch a couple of practices in July and make any judgments at all. But I believe that the Broncos think that they're getting a more accurate Flacco than he showed his last couple of years. And also, it's an offense that if you sort of study this offense, this is an offense that wants to use the tight end significantly more than Flacco is used to. And so, in my opinion, I think if you look at this offense and you're a fantasy football player, why don't you watch week 3 of the preseason and you see which tight end's getting the most targets in week 3 of the preseason and pick that guy. Because, and I don't know whether it's Fant, I don't know whether it's higher, I don't know who it is. But I think that this team is going to attempt, in the old words of Hank Stram, to matriculate the ball down the field. And the reason why that is going to be a plus if it works is very simple. That, there's not one or two or three guys in all of football who throw a better deep ball than Joe Flacco does. So I think the optimum thing is for the Broncos to build the kind of running game, sort of centered around Philip Lindsay, and the kind of intermediate passing game that you really need so that Joe Flacco can take advantage with Emmanuel Sanders and whoever to throw that deep ball 3 or 4 times a game. And that would be my optimum for Joe Flacco.
There's a lot of excitement around the new offensive scheme, but also Broncos country coming into year 2 with Bradley Chubb and Von Miller, a lot of excitement as well. Those guys have both said, 30 sacks, 25 sacks, like we can do this within a season. What do you think are reasonable expectations for both Bradley Chubb and Von Miller as a pass rushing duo in year 2?
In my opinion, I'm going to write about Von Miller in my column on Monday, and I was really, really impressed with the fact that, here's a guy who's played 8 years. He's got 98 sacks. he doesn't mind talking openly of Chase and Bruce Smith's record. You know, he knows that in his 30s, he's got to find some way to get 103 sacks, which is not going to be very easy. But I think he's taking on the challenge of slightly remaking his game more in the image of the classic outside linebacker that Vic Fangio has coached and taught over the years. And I think he has studied some outside linebackers who Fangio has coached, and I think he believes that he is ready to be a more multiple weapon than he has been. He can be better in pass drops, and look, none of us expect him to, to drop a lot. But I think he's going to have a better all-around season than he's had in the last couple of years. Now, Chubb obviously makes it possible for him to have a much better year. Whatever the numbers are, 28, 30, I don't know. But there's no question in my mind that right now, entering this season, there is not a better bookend pass rush duo in football than Chubb and Miller.
Peter, a last one for you here. 2 weeks from tonight, Mr. B, Champ Bailey, will be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. What do you think that weekend will be like for Broncos?
Well, judging by over the last, 15 or 20 years, particularly in the Twitter era of, say, the last decade, judging by the amount of grief I get every time that Carl Mecklenburg or Steve Atwater, one of those guys, doesn't get in, I have a feeling that there's going to be an awful lot of people, who are going to get on I-70 East and take a caravan and just make sure that Canton, Ohio, is Broncos country that weekend. Look, I think one of the things that is so wonderful about the Pro Football Hall of Fame and Hall of Fame weekend is it allows people who truly love the franchise that they root for to give thanks for the years and years and years of joy that Pat Bowlen made possible. Look, everything behind us right here is because of Pat Bowlen. And the football fanaticism, it wasn't started by Pat Bowlen. But I did something in my column the other day. Here's the thing about Pat Bowlen. He basically ran this team for 3 decades, and the Broncos had 5 losing seasons. Over that same period of time, what would you say are the 3 best franchises in football over that time? I would say Pittsburgh, Green Bay, New England.
Yep.
All of those franchises, each one of them had 7 losing seasons, while the Broncos had 5. So I think it's fairly easy to look at the last 2 years and say, woe is us. And, we went, whatever the Broncos went, 11-21 or whatever it was. But I do think that the reason why everybody views Pat Bowlen so fondly, and everybody will remember him forever so fondly, is that he created the greatness in this franchise that exists to this day and will exist going forward. It was his example that he set. I hope 30,000 Denverites or Coloradoans are in Canton for that weekend, because that's something that Pat Bowlen and his family truly deserve.
We hope Canton looks a little bit orange that weekend. Peter, we'll let you out of here on this. You get any good microbrews around here? I know that's big in Denver.
Yeah, I had a wheat ale last night called Moped, and I'm trying to think. It's from a brewery in Arvada.
Okay,
is that how you pronounce it? Arvada.
Arvada. Yep.
Arvada. And it was fantastic. And what I always try to do when I go to Colorado is, it was a blood orange wheat beer. What I always try to do when I go to Colorado, because there's 350 or whatever breweries here, I always try one that I've never had before. So I went into a store last night and I'm looking at the beer cooler, and it's, how do you pick? How do you choose? It's downright impossible. But I was happy with that. And by the way, I'm doing 4 shows for the NBC Sports Network that are going to be on in the month of August from my training camp trip. And the lead of the first show is going to be me with a Rocky Mountain sunset.
There you
From
go.
last night.
Beautiful.
What an incredible
That's beautiful.
visual last night. And I mean, I love coming to Denver. I love coming to Colorado. So I was glad when I looked down and saw the Broncos were opening practice first.
Exactly. Well, you'll have to try. Breckenridge makes a Broncos beer, so you'll have to try that one.
I need an
I'll
orange
do it.
ale.
Next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Okay. All right, Peter. Thank you so much for hopping on. That's Peter King of NBC Sports.